My official return is just a few minutes away. But first, I've got 3 things to say. 1. You may have noticed that I'm shooting in my car. Well, a lot of critics that I've seen on YouTube at least have some sort of little quirk in their reviews. For me, my quirk is going to be, and this is the second thing, saying my catchphrase, which is fresh off seeing, and then the movie name. And the car is going to be part of the personality, because you can't get much fresher than recording the review the second you're done with the movie. Now, some people may say, "Oh, but your brain needs time to process." I don't agree with that. So, those are the first two things. And the second thing is I have one final modification to my rating system. Okay, I'm doing a mix between my new rating system, the O rating system, and my original CinematicCritic out of 11 rating system. This being because I felt like I needed a little more wiggle room with my ratings. So, 1 is very bad. 2 is blow, as in it's terrible. 3 is no-go, as in don't go. 4 is oh no, as in bad. I recommend that you skip those 4. Consider 5 is uh-oh, consider skipping. 6 is oh my, a little disappointing. And 7 is so-so. Okay. 8 to 10 and 11 are recommends, as in I say you go see it. Go is pretty good. That's an 8. A 9 is oh, as in good. A 10 is whoa, as in really good. And an 11 is oh-mazing. Borderline perfect, as good as it gets. I can tell you right now, it's very hard to get one of those. Just as it was very hard to get an 11 in my old thing. But in my old CinematicCritic reviews. However, I have added one additional rating. It is almost a 0. As bad as it gets. If the movie is absolutely terrible, I will give it a 0. Now you may say, but doesn't that mean you haven't seen the movie? No. If there's no rating, then I haven't seen the movie. If there's a rating of a 0, that's a rating, and it means avoid at all costs. So now that that has been said, I do have to let you know that I am adjusting the ratings of last weekend. Avengers is a rating of 6, 7 for fans. Jurassic Park is a 7, 6 for hardcore fans. Spy is an 8. And Feelings, the girl did have some flaws in that, and there were other, and she wasn't used all that much, and there were other flaws in the movie, so I do have to rate that a 10 out of 11, not an 11 out of 11, because I did originally rate it a 7 out of 7, but it's a 10 out of 11, which is still a really good rating. I'm the CinematicCritic, fresh off from seeing the movie Ted 2, and I just gotta say, I am sorely disappointed. I'll talk first before giving its actual rating, but let me just tell you that this movie had a very long Act 1. Very long. There was a lot of build-up, and a lot of things you didn't see in the trailer that you didn't want to see in this movie. Critics have been giving it around 50%. Fans have been giving it around 70% on Flickster. Me? Well, listen to what I think of it. I would say hand me Ted 1 over Ted 2. You know, if I had a choice between two movies being Ted and Ted 2, I'll take Ted. One of the big lacks is there is a lack of a narrative in this. And you may say, oh, but the trailers make it out to seem that Ted has to prove that he's a human and not property. Well, yeah, that's what the trailers say, but this movie spends so much time elsewhere. the comedy in this feels more forced than in Ted 2. It doesn't just come naturally. A lot of it is forced. They do a good job, to the credit of explaining why John lost his wife. They say it just didn't work, and that does kind of add to its credit to what comes next. But what comes to next still doesn't really belong, and that's Ted and Tami-Lynn not getting along. Then then we go into this thing about, and this was the kind of funny part, about how they think a baby can make them happy again, and they go through this whole. We see it in the trailer, but it's when you watch it in the movie, it's unnecessary. On how do they get a donor? First, they ask Flash, and he says he can't do it because he only has one left, and he wants to save it in case he has to eat it Sunday if he's lost at sea. Yeah, that joke was a miss. The Tom Brady moment is not as funny as you would think. It's not as funny as the trailers make it to be. That fails. Then there's the whole moment where John's like, why didn't you just ask me? And Ted's like, you would really do that for me? And he's like, yeah, I'd do anything for you. Thunder Buddies for life. And that was really where everything went downhill, because it's ultimately revealed that they can't do it. Don't quite remember why. There are certain things that come into play where they can't even do that. He can't donate he can donate his sperm, but they can't inseminate a girl. Don't know if that's the right word. But the whole thing is then everything starts falling apart. Now, this movie actually takes making Ted property a lot deeper than you would think. But again, it's not till like 40 minutes into this movie that it actually starts to take off. Talk about a very long Act 1. I was starting to say, so when's this movie going to come? When are they going to realize that Ted isn't a human? And like the moment where in the trailer she says, Ted, you're going to have to prove that you're a human in the court of law. That's modified, apparently, because that moment doesn't come till after that actual hearing. And the hearing is over in a matter of minutes, and they declare Ted property, and that's really what the movie is about. Not Ted fighting them calling him property, but Ted becomes property, and he has to fight to show that he's not property. But he does that all while having already been declared property. Now, I get the whole need for a fight, but he doesn't do it with a lawyer. He does it with this lawyer character who is played by Amanda Seyfried. I hope I'm saying that right. And her name in the movie is Samantha, and honestly, she's probably the only good actress in this movie. One could argue that Seth MacFarlane and Mark Wahlberg are good as John and Ted, but I mean, honestly, their personalities of the actual characters seem to have gone down from the first movie. In the first movie, they were funny. In this movie, they're trying to be serious, and yet their funniness is getting in the way. They're trying to mix comedy with seriousness, and that's a very dangerous thing. Whereas they did it well in Ted 2, they did it by doing all their comedy, then getting serious about it. In this, there were moments of comedy when there should have been seriousness all the way throughout. And it wasn't until the very end that the seriousness was actually there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The other thing that I found interesting was they decided to have the return of Donnie. Now, if you remember Donnie was the guy that tried to kidnap Ted at the end of Ted. Well, Donnie's here to try to kidnap Ted at the end of Ted 2. And he's all like, oh, but this isn't kidnapping because you've been declared property. Well, I think there's a little bit of a logic mess up here, because if he's property, isn't he still the property of Johnny, in which case you still technically stole him? But anyway, he's working for the CEO of Hasbro, and he's revealed to be a janitor at Hasbro, and he reveals to the CEO of Hasbro that Ted, who apparently was a Hasbro bear, and the CEO's like, I know, he came to life, blah, 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 and Donnie's like, yeah, but now they've declared him property, which means you could take him back. And the CEO's like, I can't be involved in this, but you can get him. And I was like, yeah, here we go. Here comes the movie. But again, it's only used in the last 30 minutes of the movie, kind of like Ted, but there's such a big buildup, and there's barely any Act 2. Now, for those of you who don't know act structures, Act 1, it's kind of like the introduction, it's the setup of everything. Act 2, it's how everything plays out, and Act 3 is where the resolution lies. However, in this movie, the trial only lasts overall like a matter of 15 minutes. And there isn't much to add to Act 2, so Act 2 is over in a matter of 20. And so there really is no development. You've got this long setup in Act 1, and you've got this very short Act 2, where the problems actually arise, and Act 3, with the breaking point lasts forever too, the climax. You've got Ted getting mad at Johnny about how Ted has been saying John needs to get back out there, needs to get a new girlfriend, and he's finally fallen in love with the character Samantha, their lawyer, and then he gets mad at him for that, and that's what ultimately... I mean, honestly, it's a repeat of the first movie. That's the tricky things about sequels. You got to make sure you're not repeating things you've already done. And unfortunately, they were very repetitive in that sense. Again, he gets mad at Johnny, and again, Johnny has to come save him from when Donnie tries to kidnap him. So again, we've got this. The kid is not in this. Instead of the kid, we've got the CEO. And that's the other thing. The CEO is not really used. The CEO of Hasbro shows up, 3 times? And the third time he shows up, he's like, you're on your own, Donnie. He runs away. We don't hear anything about him. There's no end narration in this either. There's no what happened to the CEO of Hasbro. Missed opportunity there. Instead, there are some funny jokes in this. One of them being that he says he's the CEO of Mattel, but I mean, Donnie is even more. Donnie wasn't much of a character in the first one, but he did have some of an aspect of characteristics too. He had that kind of creepy aspect. But when you see the creepy aspect again in Ted 2, and it's the same exact thing, and honestly, it's not done as well. So, he is a character in this. Donnie isn't all that good. Samantha was a better character, I will say, than John's girlfriend in the first Ted movie. Maybe it's a better actress. I don't know. Some people would argue that, I mean, we're talking about the girl that's Meg in Family Guy, in case you didn't know that. Not the new actress, the old one. The other thing is I could still always hear Peter's voice whenever I look at Ted. That's kind of a hard one to come with. If someone was to hand me... I said I would take Ted over Ted too. But likewise, if I was handed a couple of episodes of Family Guy and the Ted DVD, I'd throw the Ted DVD over and watch Family Guy. Depending on the episodes, actually. But anyway, this movie all comes down to, it's stuff that we have seen before. It is unfortunately, this is a big issue with sequels, and I was praying that Ted would not fall into this, but it does. It falls into, it's a rehash of the first. We have more jokes with like pot. We have one of the more funny moments is actually, ironically, one of those pot jokes where Ted refuses to smoke out of one of the bongs because it's shaped like a penis. But I can see why this is rated R. The first one, I don't remember the first one was rated R or PG-13, but if it was rated R, the first one, I couldn't really see why. It was rated PG-13, that sounds right. And this one, I can definitely see why it's rated R. There's violence, there's constant talking, there's... How many times do they drop the F-bomb in this? Wow. I mean, I get that it's a movie that's supposed to be more adult, but I think that fans of the first Ted movie are going to be a little disappointed. I honestly expected to go into this with the ability that it was going to be about as good as the first Ted movie. But I cannot say that because of all the reasons I've listed. I can't say that because it's got such a big set-off, and Act 3, though I did say it was long, but it's long only because it drags out the problem, and the resolution is over. The very end of the movie is over in a matter of minutes, literally 3 or 4 minutes. I'll tell you what happens. They decide to kill off John. Just kidding! Yeah, just kidding. Now, honestly, and you may hate me for this, but the fact is, if they had killed off John, then maybe that would have actually had an impact, and maybe it would have been a little better. I'm sorry, but that's true. It would have been an unexpected twist. Unfortunately, the whole time that John was dead, I was thinking, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. And lo and behold, no duh, it's a lie. And he says, oh, I was getting you back at, making me think you were retarded at the end of the Ted movie. And Ted was like, oh, you totally got me. And, I mean, Samantha and tami-lynn are like, oh, you dick. I can't believe you did that. But it's the way they react, and they really do think he's a dick for doing that. I mean, I went to an early show, so there wasn't a huge audience, but so I didn't get an audience reaction for that. But I have a feeling the audience aren't going to react that much because they got to know that's coming. I mean, this is one of the more obvious things that I've seen. And then after that, Morgan Freeman. Let's just say it. Morgan Freeman. You're all thinking it. Why even use his character name? I'll tell you his character name. It's Patrick Megan. But come on, everyone. So anyway, this Patrick Megan guy is their last hope, and he's like, yeah, I won't take the case. You guys don't have any emotional bond. Excuse me? Now, it would make sense if he didn't take the case for some other reason. But him not taking the case because they don't have an emotional bond. Have you not seen the emotional bond that they've already had, and now you're going to tell me just because Ted saved... Yeah, there is a point where Ted saves the life of... I'm sorry, I've got it mixed up. Because, see, my mind is thinking elsewise. There's a moment where John saves Ted's life. But, I mean, honestly, it would have worked better if it had been flipped around, if Ted had saved John's life. That could have been a good resolution. That could have gone somewhere. I just think this movie fell into a lot of plot holes. Or I should say, no plot holes. I should say the plot wasn't really thought through. There is, as I said, a lack of a narrative. A narrative is an overall story that can be told. There is an idea here, but no narrative. The idea is that that Ted is property. The idea is that... No, I'm sorry. The idea is that Ted has to prove he's human, but the whole movie does pretty much end within the first 45 minutes as Ted being property, and that's how he goes through the whole movie. So it's like, and it's not until the final minutes that he's declared not property, declared a human. You could argue that's the adventure, but that's not what the trailer's made it out to be, certainly. It's not a fight for his humanity. It's a fight to get his humanity back, because throughout the whole movie, he does go through it as property. And he is treated as such. Like I said, he's fired from his job. his marriage to Tami-Lynn is annulled. I mean, the other thing is that... Sorry, my computer went to sleep. And there we go. The one other thing is that the argument with Tami-Lynn is never again addressed. It's never addressed. It's just that one time. I mean, so even that was looked over. The relationship between Ted and Tami-Lynn. Meanwhile, the relationship between Samantha and Johnny was actually pretty good. It grew. But again, it was a repeat of what happened in the first Ted movie. So I'm sorry to have to do this, but I am going to have to give this a fairly low rating. It certainly disappointed me. So if you think it's going to get a 5 to a 7, you're wrong. I'm sorry. Let's see here. A 6 would be a little disappointing, but this was more than a little disappointing. A 5 would be an uh-oh, consider skipping. And a 4 would be an oh no. I don't think I'm going to go so far as an oh no. And it was more than a little disappointing, so let's go down the middle. I will give this movie an uh-oh, which is consider skipping. Especially if you saw the first Ted movie and you didn't like it, you're not going to like this one. It's got pretty much the same narrative, pretty much the same setup, and honestly, some of the hits that the first movie had are misses in this movie, and there weren't really any misses in the first movie that are hits here. So 5, uh-oh, consider skipping. It's up to you. It's your call. Maybe if it was a little funnier, it would have gotten a little higher rating, but I'm sorry that my official return had to be with a movie that was disappointing. However, I would recommend you go look at my reviews for Avengers, Spy, surprisingly a good movie, Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, and Feelings, Inside Out. The Inside Out review is actually surprisingly good because it was a surprisingly good movie. That'll give you an idea. But anyway, it's great to be back officially. There are no other movies that I'm going to see this week. I don't think anything else really came out. But I look forward to doing more. This has been the official return of CinematicCritic, and I look forward to many reviews in the future. I feel like I should have a sign-off catchphrase too. Keep it fresh! I'll work on a sign-off catchphrase, but that's it for now.